Hello guys and welcome to another video. My name's Mark, I'm an entrepreneur and property investor, and in today's video we're talking about, can anybody become rich in today's day and age? With all the information that's available out there, can anybody become rich? Now before we get into the video, if you wouldn't mind giving this video a massive like, it really does help me out with the algorithm, and why not consider subscribing? We've got about £5,500 at the moment in our subscriber dividend portfolio, and every single month we pay those dividends out to you, and that allows us to take part in the passive income journey together, and hopefully I inspire other people to become investors over time, and hopefully more people become wealthy. Let's get into the video. Let's talk about, can anybody be rich? And really I'm going to answer that question straight away with yes, I believe anybody can be rich. And the formula for it is pretty simple, right? It's make sure your expenses are less than your income, and then make sure you invest the difference. Now, if we think about it maybe in a different term, because that seems very simplistic, but let's talk about fitness and maybe how to get into shape. If you wanted to lose weight, can anybody get a six-pack? And the answer would be yes. The answer is less calories in than you burn. And as long as you have a calorie deficit, in the same way as long as you have an income surplus or an expenses deficit, you will lose weight or you will become more wealthy. Now the real question is, if you manage to achieve this excess income or the expenses deficit, whichever way around you want to talk about it, if you do that, where should you put your money to give yourself the best possible chance to become wealthy over time? And I'm going to talk about only two places I think you can do that. And I do believe, personally, there's only two places you can do it. And number one is property. And number two is the public markets. And I'm going to call them index funds. And the reason I'm calling them index funds is because they're passively managed and they automatically track the index. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But why do I think property, first of all, is one of the ways that you can invest this spread, this difference, and how you can become wealthy? Well, property has utility, doesn't it? It has a value to it based on the fact that you can live in it. If you had a property and nobody could ever live in it, then it becomes very unvaluable. However, if somebody can live in it, then it becomes more valuable. So property has utility, and it also makes money in two different ways. Number one is it makes money through rent. And the number two is it makes money through capital appreciation. Luckily, my writing is terrible. So there are two methods of making money out of property. And the reason I wanted to talk about property first is the third thing about it I think is really interesting, is it allows you to apply leverage. And even when you're just starting, you can really apply leverage at not too great a rate that you're going to get yourself in trouble, or not in serious trouble, but also enough that you could gain benefit should property prices start to increase. And let's talk about how leverage works using a £100,000 house. First of all, that you've purchased to live in. So there's going to be no rental aspect to this. Let's say, for example, you bought a house for 100k and you put it on a 10% mortgage. So you have a 90k mortgage and you've put £10,000 into this property. 5 years have passed, the property's grown in value, you've done some bits and bobs in the house, it's now worth 150,000. Well, the bank gets some of that money, doesn't it? No, you get all of the capital appreciation. So your £10,000 investment, if this has become worth 50,000, means that you now have £60,000 worth of equity. So this is why property, in the long run, generally speaking, and again, we have to look long term. If you're expecting it in 1 year, we don't know what's happening in 1 year. We don't know what's happening in 3 years. But if you look at a 5, 10, 15, 20 year period, property tends to go up in value. Nothing's guaranteed. Investing's always about, there are no guarantees. Things happen. But generally speaking, property goes up in value, mainly because money goes down in value. You know, inflation takes place and money becomes worth less. So that helps you on the debt side as well. Let's say, for example, inflation's run over that period of 5 years at 10%. So in total, so 2% per year compounding up, maybe it's 13%, but let's call it 10. Well, your 90 grand debt is now only worth, in real terms, £81,000. So Inflation helps you because your debt comes down in value, relative, and it also helps you because your property becomes worth more, relatively speaking. So property and leverage really does help you out. Now, my first property, what I did, I bought a deal that was a bit more expensive than this. It was $176,000, but I rented out my 2 spare bedrooms. And that paid actually the entire mortgage and all the bills. So I got to essentially live there rent-free. The property over the course of the next 5 years went from being worth 176 to I think it was 250. So over that period I gained £75,000 worth of value. Bear in mind, we only put in about 20,000 at the beginning. So 20 to 75,000, it's a huge return. I also had all the mortgage paid, all the bills paid by my tenants. So that was a fantastic first investment for me at the age that I was. I think I was 29 at the time. So at 29, that was a fantastic first investment for me. I since kept that property, refinanced some of the money out, and that funded my second house. It actually has funded my third and fourth houses if I really think about it, because my second house, which was a result of this, was able to pull funds through to fund 2 and 3. So property really is where I started off, and reason being, it allowed me to apply leverage. So let's move on to index funds and why they're different to property for me, and also very, very valuable. Well, first of all, for my first property, I needed £20,000 to get started. You can buy index funds with as little as £25. In fact, I'm sure there's platforms where you can do it for less, but you can get started for a very, very low amount of investment. The next thing to say about index funds are that over a period of time, these companies are run on your behalf. So let's talk about the FTSE 100 as a good example. You own all the companies within the FTSE 100, and as companies become more valuable, the index fund automatically buys more of them. As they become less valuable, it automatically sells them. So you back the winners and sell the losers. So it really is a self-regulating and self-satisfying fund. It does it all itself. You don't need to do anything. In my property, my first property that I owned when I lived with my tenants, I had to fix any problems. I had to make sure that I paid for everything, right? Like all the rent, all the mortgages were paid, all the bills were paid, everything was kept in maintenance. The index fund allows you to invest in a business that's run by a professional management team on your behalf. Now, it's rare that you can apply leverage to index funds. Well, that's not strictly true. There are platforms that you can, and there are funds that do it at leverage. But if I'm honest with you, it's not a traditional way of investing in index funds. It tends to be a much slower burn. And index funds, on average, will return between 8 and 10%. And this is the key thing. When it comes to any sort of investing, you need to build a plan that gives you a reliable and realistic return over a long period of time. And I think as long as anybody creates a spread between their income and expenses, invests in the 2 areas that have traditionally provided both wealth creation and what is known as passive income, income that happens while you're asleep. In terms of index funds, it's businesses ran on your behalf. In terms of property, the capital appreciation, the rent and all that sort of stuff is done, as long as you've got a managing agent, for example, on your behalf, and it's out of your field of view. Most of this is possible for anybody. So guys, that's what I want people to take away from this. Anybody can be rich. Will everybody be rich? Of course not. Most people will not create the spread. Most people will not then invest in one of these 2 areas. But for me, I believe that if anybody does this, anybody can become rich. And I think the more you get addicted to creating this spread, the harder you'll work, the harder you'll cut your expenses, the more you'll invest, and then ultimately, the more wealthy you become. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you on the next video. Cheers, guys.